In this video, we'll go over drug stems. Stems can be used to identify the class and indications of a drug. Quick overview before we get started. Stems are naming conventions used to indicate pharmacologically related substances. Stems can be prefixes, suffixes, or infixes. Prefixes are at the beginning of the drug name, suffixes are at the ends, and infixes are somewhere in between. Stems are only found in generic drug names and not brand names. And in 1993, the World Health Assembly endorsed a resolution which states that brand names should not be derived from generic drug nomenclature and stems should not be used in brand names. The Assembly reasoned that such practice could frustrate the rational selection of generic names and ultimately compromise the safety of patients by promoting confusion in drug nomenclature. Even though brand names do not have stems, they can still imply classification and indication. Stems can imply physiological, pathological, or therapeutic suggestions. Because stems provide standardized terminology and classifications, we can group them into broader categories, making drug memorization much easier, especially with the top 200 drugs. There are hundreds of stems, but I've only included the stems in drugs that you see more frequently. I've presented these stems divided into 7 categories to help with grouping and memorization. I've left the timestamp for each section in the description box below. A lot of the drugs in the same category have similar indications even though they have different stems. So try to associate the stems with the broader categories to try to get a better sense of how these drugs are related. I've only included FDA-approved indications and arranged them in a way to show the similarities and trends between drugs having the same stem and class. Don't be discouraged by the long list of indications because drugs sharing the same stem have similar indications. Finally, check out my top 200 drugs video to see these stems in action. Starting off with cardiology drugs, beta blockers have the stem OLOL. Atenolol, bisoprolol, metoprolol, nadolol, nebivolol, and propranolol are indicated for hypertension. Combined alpha and beta blockers have the stem ALOL. Labetalol is indicated for hypertension, and sotalol is for arrhythmias. Vasodilators have the stem DIL. Alprostadil is mostly used for erectile dysfunction, but also has indications for cardiovascular conditions. Carvedilol, diltiazem, and minoxidil are all used for hypertension. It's important to note that minoxidil is also the active ingredient in Rogaine, which is used to treat male pattern alopecia. Also, the preferred stem for diltiazem is tiazem, indicating that it is a calcium channel blocker. Calcium channel blockers that are nifedipine derivatives have the stem dipine. Amlodipine, felodipine, and nifedipine are indicated for hypertension. Also note that diltiazem and verapamil are calcium channel blockers with preferred stems tiazem and pamil respectively. Angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitors have the stem pril. Benazepril, enalapril, fosinapril, lisinopril, quinapril, and ramipril are indicated for hypertension. Angiotensin II receptor blockers have the stem sartan. Azilsartan, irbesartan, losartan, olmesartan, telmisartan, and valsartan are indicated for hypertension. Keep in mind that 11 of these drugs listed in these tables are in the top 200, so just by recognizing these 3 stems we can cut down on the amount of brute memorization. Diuretics as a whole do not have a stem. Furosemide derivatives have the stem semide. Furosemide and torsemide are indicated for edema and hypertension. Pyridinide derivatives have the stem etinide. Bumetanide is indicated for edema. Thiazide derivatives have the stem tizide. Chlorothiazide and hydrochlorothiazide are indicated for edema and hypertension. Aldosterone antagonists that are spironolactone derivatives have the stem renone. Eplerenone is indicated for hypertension and heart failure. Note that diuretics are classified by their pharmaceutical compositions above. Diuretics can also be grouped based on their mechanism of action and site of action. Grouping the diuretics by their mechanistic class in addition to their stem derivatives can be helpful in showing their relationship to one another. Carbonic anhydrase inhibitors have the stem zolamide. Acetazolamide, brinzolamide, dorzolamide, and methazolamide are indicated for glaucoma. Acetazolamide is also indicated for edema. Brinzolamide and dorzolamide are only supplied as ophthalmic drops and are also indicated for ocular hypertension. Note that carbonic anhydrase inhibitors do not have an approved stem. The stem zolamide occurs in most carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, but not all. Antihypertensives that are prazosin derivatives have the stem azosin. Doxazosin, prazosin, and terazosin are indicated for hypertension. Note that alphazosin and tamsulosin are related but do not use the preferred stem. All of these drugs are alpha blockers. Antiarrhythmics that have the stem arone are amiodarone and dronedarone. They are indicated for arrhythmias. Platelet aggregation inhibitors have the stem grel. Anagrelide, clopidogrel, prasugrel, and ticagrelor are indicated for thromboembolic event prophylaxis. Heparin derivatives and low molecular weight heparins have the stem perin. Dalteparin, enoxaparin, and heparin are indicated for thromboembolic event prophylaxis. Antithrombotics that are blood coagulation factor Xa inhibitors have the stem Zaban. Apixaban and rivaroxaban are indicated for deep vein thrombosis, or DVT, and pulmonary embolism, or PE. Antihyperlipidemics, or HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors, have the stem vastatin. Atorvastatin, fluvastatin, lovastatin, pitavastatin, pravastatin, rosuvastatin, and simvastatin are indicated for hypercholesterolemia. Keep in mind that the stem for HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors is vastatin and not statin. It's common to call these drugs statins, but the word statin is also present in other drugs such as nystatin, an antifungal. Antihyperlipidemics that are clofibrate derivatives have the stem fibrate. Fenofibrate and gemfibrozil are indicated for hypercholesterolemia or dyslipidemia. Note that gemfibrozil does not use the preferred stem but is related to fenofibrate. Bile acid sequestrants that have the stem coles are cholestyramine, cholesevelam, and cholestipol. These drugs are indicated for hypercholesterolemia. Note that there is no preferred stem for bile acid sequestrants, but there is a trend in the spelling that makes it easy to group these drugs together. Monoclonal antibodies that are human-based, acting on targets of the cardiovascular system, have the stem CUMOB. Alirocumab and evolocumab are also proprotein convertase subtilissin kexin type 9 or PCSK9 inhibitors. They are indicated for hypercholesterolemia and cardiovascular system disorders. Note that monoclonal antibodies have a base stem of MOB with a substem indicating the species on which the immunoglobulin sequence is based, along with a prefix indicating its target. Some PCSK9 inhibitors are human-based monoclonal antibodies acting on targets of the cardiovascular system, but not all PCSK9 inhibitors have the CUMOB stem. Moving on to neurology drugs, antidepressants that are imipramine derivatives have the stem pramine. Clomipramine is indicated for OCD. Desipramine and imipramine is indicated for depression. Antidepressants that are fluoxetine derivatives have the stem oxetine. Atomoxetine is indicated for ADHD. Duloxetine, fluoxetine, paroxetine, and vortioxetine are indicated for major depressive disorder. Miscellaneous antidepressants have the stem zidone. Nefazidone, trazodone, and vilazodone are indicated for major depressive disorder. Note that zidone is not an approved stem, but is a suffix shared by a few antidepressant drugs. Antidepressants that are dibenzo-AD cycloheptane derivatives have the stem triptyline. Amitriptyline and nortriptyline are indicated for depression. Benzodiazepines have the stem azalam or azepam. Alprazolam, midazolam, clonazepam, diazepam, lorazepam, and oxazepam are used for anxiety. Astazolam, triazolam, and temazepam are indicated for insomnia. Note that benzodiazepines do not have an approved stem. The stem azepam is recognized for anti-anxiety agents that are diazepam derivatives, and the azalam stem is a suffix in many other benzodiazepines. Clobazam, chlordiazepoxide, and chlorazepate are benzodiazepines that do not have either stem. Psychotropics that are phenylpiperazine derivatives have the stem piprazole. Aripiprazole and brexpiprazole are indicated for schizophrenia and major depressive disorder. Note that future use of the piprazole stem is discouraged due to conflict with the stem prazole. Antipsychotics that are risperidone derivatives have the stem paridone. Paliperidone and risperidone are indicated for schizophrenia. Antipsychotics with serotonin and dopamine activity have the stem sedone. Lorazepam and ziprasidone are indicated for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Note that sedona is not an approved stem, but is a suffix shared by a few antipsychotic drugs. Tricyclic psychoactive compounds have the stem apine. Acenapine, clozapine, loxapine, olanzapine, and quetiapine are indicated for schizophrenia. Mirtazapine is indicated for major depressive disorder. Tricyclic dibenzoxapine derivatives have the stem oxapine. Doxapine is indicated for anxiety, depression, insomnia, and pruritus, or itching. Tricyclic anticonvulsants have the stem zapine. Carbamazepine and oxcarbazepine are indicated for seizures. Note that tricyclic compounds have the base stem of pine. GABA-mimetic agents have the stem GAB. Gabapentin, pregabalin, and vigabatrin are indicated for seizures. Nootropes that are piracetam derivatives have the stem racetam. Brivaracetam and levetiracetam are indicated for seizures. Hypnotics that are barbituric acid derivatives have the stem barb. Amobarbital and phenobarbital are indicated for sedation. Orexin receptor antagonists have the stem orexint. Lemborexant and suvorexant are indicated for insomnia. CNS stimulants that have the stem dafinil are modafinil and armodafinil. These drugs are used for excessive somnolence. Note that dafinil is not an approved stem, but is a suffix shared by a few CNS stimulants. Hypnotics that are non-benzodiazepine receptor agonists that are zolpidem derivatives have the stem pidem. Zolpidem is indicated for insomnia. Pyrazolopyrimidine derivatives have the stem plon. Zaloplon is indicated for insomnia. Zopiclone derivatives have the stem clone. Esopiclone is indicated for insomnia. These drugs are also known as Z-drugs. Cholinesterase inhibitors or physostigmine derivatives have the stem stigmine. Neostigmine and pyridostigmine are indicated for reversal of neuromuscular blockade. Rivastigmine is indicated for dementia. Monoamine oxidase type B inhibitors have the stem geline. Rasagiline and selegiline are indicated for Parkinson's disease. Serotonin receptor agonists that are sumatriptan derivatives have the stem tryptin. Almotriptan, elatriptan, frovatriptan, naratriptan, rizatriptan, sumatriptan, and zolmatriptan are indicated for migraines. Calcitonin gene-related peptide antagonists have the stem gapant. Rimegapant and ubrogapant are indicated for migraines. Monoclonal antibodies that are human or humanized based, acting on targets of the neural system, have the stem Numab and Nezumab. Aranumab and Fremanezumab and Galcanezumab are indicated for migraine prophylaxis. Note that these are fairly new drugs with only brand names currently supplied on the market. They are generally administered subcutaneously, usually once a month. Mixed opiate receptor agonist antagonists have the stem Adol. Tapentadol and Tramadol are indicated for pain. Narcotic agonist antagonists that are normorphine type have the stem Nol. Naloxegol is indicated for opioid-induced constipation. Naloxone is indicated for opiate overdose. Naltrexone is indicated for opioid dependence. Moving on to gastroenterology drugs. Anti-ulcer agents or proton pump inhibitors that are benzimidazole derivatives have the stem prazole. Dexlansoprazole, esomeprazole, lansoprazole, omeprazole, pantoprazole, and rabeprazole are indicated for gastroesophageal reflux disease, erosive esophagitis, and gastric hypersecretion. Histamine H2 receptor antagonists that are cimetidine derivatives have the stem tidine. Cimetidine, famotidine, nizatidine, and ranitidine are indicated for gastroesophageal reflux disease and gastric hypersecretion. Serotonin 5-HT3 antagonists have the stem citron. Allocetron is indicated for severe diarrhea that is predominant in IBS. Grandicetron and ondansetron are indicated for post-operative or chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. Neurokinin NK1 receptor antagonists have the stem patant. Aprepitant and rolapitant are indicated for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. Cannabinoid receptor agonists have the stem NAB. Dronabinol and nabilone are indicated for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. Peptides and glycopeptides that have GI indications have the stem TIDE. Linaclotide and plecanatide are indicated for idiopathic constipation and IBS characterized by constipation. Note that these drugs are both guanylate cyclase C agonist, but the above stem tide is not exclusive to this class. Anti-inflammatory agents that are salicylic acid derivatives have the stem salazide and salazine. Valsalazide, mesalazine, and sulfasalazine are indicated for ulcerative colitis. Note that mesalazine is the same drug as mesalamine. Moving on to respiratory drugs. Tricyclic histamine H1 receptor antagonists have the stem atidine. Loratadine, cyproheptadine, and olopatadine are indicated for allergic rhinitis and urticaria. Note that the stem was previously tadine, but was changed because it was not exclusive to this class. Diphenylmethylpiperazine derivative antihistaminics have the stem izine. Cetirizine and levocetirizine are indicated for allergic rhinitis, urticaria, and upper respiratory tract allergies. Hydroxyzine is indicated for pruritus, anxiety, and nausea and vomiting. Leukotriene receptor antagonists have the stem Leucast. Monteleucast and Zafirleucast are indicated for asthma. Antihistaminics or local vasoconstrictors that are antazoline derivatives have the stem azoline. Nefazoline and oxymetazoline are indicated for nasal congestion. Bronchodilators that are phenethylamine derivatives have the stem pterol. Albuterol, formoterol, and salmeterol are indicated for asthma. Quaternary ammonium salts that are atropine derivatives have the stem tropium. Ipratropium and tiotropium are indicated for COPD. Moving on to endocrinology drugs. Antihyperglycemics that are sulfonamide derivatives have the stem GLI. Glimepiride, glipizide, and glyburide are indicated for type 2 diabetes. Note that the stem was previously GLY. Meglitinides have the stem glinide. Nataglinide and repaglinide are indicated for type 2 diabetes. Dipeptidyl peptidase 4 inhibitors have the stem gliptin. Allogliptin, linagliptin, saxagliptin, and sitagliptin are indicated for type 2 diabetes. Glucagon-like peptide analogs have the stem tide and glutide. Exenatide and lixasenatide are indicated for type 2 diabetes. Dulaglutide, liraglutide, and semaglutide are indicated for type 2 diabetes and disorders of the cardiovascular system prophylaxis. Sodium glucose cotransporter 2 inhibitors that are fluorescein derivatives have the stem gliflozin. Canagliflozin, dapagliflozin, empagliflozin, and ertugliflozin are indicated for type 2 diabetes and disorders of the cardiovascular system prophylaxis. Prednisone and prednisolone derivative steroids as a whole are indicated for inflammatory conditions. Methylprednisolone, prednisolone, and prednisone have the stem pred. Clobetazole and halobetazole have the stem betazole. Alclometazone and mometazone have the stem metazone. Beclomethasone, betamethasone, and dexamethasone have the stem methazone. Steroids that are not prednisolone derivatives have the stem alone. Fluocinolone and triamcinolone are indicated for inflammatory and endocrine disorders. Corticosteroids that are not prednisolone derivatives have the stem cort. Fludrocortisone and hydrocortisone are indicated for inflammatory and endocrine disorders. Steroids for topical use that are acetyl derivatives have the stem anide. Budesonide, desinide, and fluocinolone are indicated for endocrine and inflammatory disorders. Steroids that are progestogens have the stem gest. Levonorgestrel is indicated for emergency contraception. Medroxyprogesterone is indicated for endometrial disorders. Magestrol is indicated for breast cancer, cachexia, and endometrial disorders. Progesterone is indicated for endometrial disorders. Antiestrogens of the clomiphene and tamoxifen groups have the stem ephene. Clomiphene is indicated for ovulatory disorders. Osbemophene is indicated for menopausal symptoms. Raloxifene and tamoxifen are used for breast cancer. Calcium metabolism regulators or bisphosphonates have the stem dronate. Alendronate, abandronate, risedronate, and zoledronate are indicated for osteoporosis. Vitamin D analogs have the stem calci. Calcipotriene is indicated for plaque psoriasis. Calcitrol is indicated for hypocalcemia, plaque psoriasis, and secondary hyperparathyroidism. Cholecalciferol and ergocalciferol are indicated for vitamin D deficiencies. Muscarinic receptor antagonists have the stem phenicin. Darafenicin and solifenicin are indicated for overactive bladder symptoms. Testosterone reductase inhibitors have the stem steroid. Dutasteride and finasteride are indicated for benign prostatic hyperplasia. Inhibitors of phosphodiesterase PDE5 with vasodilator action have the stem afil. Sildenafil, tadalafil, and vardenafil are indicated for erectile dysfunction. Moving on to immunomodulation and inflammatory drugs. Anti-inflammatory agents that are acetic acid derivatives have the stems clofenac, fenac, dolac, and ac. Notice that the base stem for anti-inflammatory agents that are acetic acid derivatives is ac. Napafenac is generally supplied as an ophthalmic agent and used for ocular pain and inflammation. Diclofenac, atodolac, ketorolac, and solandac are indicated for pain and arthritis. Anti-inflammatory agents that are ibuprofen derivatives have the stem profen. Flurbiprofen, ibuprofen, and ketoprofen are indicated for pain and arthritis. Anti-inflammatory agents that are isoxicam derivatives have the stem acam. Meloxicam and piroxicam are indicated for pain and arthritis. Aromatase inhibitors that are imidazole triazole derivatives have the stem razole. Anastrozole and letrozole are indicated for breast cancer. Immunosuppressants that are rapamycin derivatives have the stem rolimus. Everolimus, sirolimus, and tacrolimus are indicated for immunotherapy and inflammatory conditions. Angiogenesis inhibitors have the stem anib. Nintedanib and vandetanib are indicated for immunotherapy and inflammatory conditions. Tyrosine kinase inhibitors have the stem tinib. Ruxolitinib, tofacitinib, and upadacitinib are indicated for immunotherapy and inflammatory conditions. Isophosphoramide mustard derivatives have the stem phosphamide. Ifosfamide and cyclophosphamide are indicated for immunomodulation and inflammatory conditions. Monoclonal antibodies have different stems based off their origin and target. Rituximab, trastuzumab, pembrolizumab, adalimumab, and infliximab are indicated for immunomodulation and inflammatory conditions. Moving on to the final section, infectious disease drugs. Cephalosporins have the stem ceph. Cefazolin, ceftonir, cefotaxime, ceftriaxone, cefurozime, and cephalexin are indicated for bacterial infections. Penicillins have the stem psilin. Amoxicillin, ampicillin, dicloxacillin, penicillin, and piperacillin are indicated for bacterial infections. Antibiotics that are carbapenem derivatives have the stem penem. Doripenem and ertapenem are indicated for bacterial infections. Antibiotics that are quinolone derivatives have the stem floxacin. Ciprofloxacin, levofloxacin, moxifloxacin, and ofloxacin are indicated for bacterial infections. Note that the base stem for quinolone derivatives is oxacin. The stem floxacin indicates fluorinated quinolones. Antibiotics that are tetracycline derivatives have the stem cycline. Demiclocycline, doxycycline, minocycline, and tetracycline are indicated for bacterial infections. Antibiotics that are rifamycin derivatives have the stem rifa. Rifampin, rifapentine, and rifaximin are indicated for bacterial infections. Antibiotics that are micromonospora strains have the stem mycin. Fidaxomycin and gentamicin are indicated for bacterial infections. Antibiotics that are streptomyces strains have the stem mycin. Neomycin, streptomycin, tobramycin, vancomycin, talithromycin, clindamycin, lincomycin, daptomycin, azithromycin, clarithromycin, and erythromycin are indicated for bacterial infections. Note that not all the drugs in each subclass are streptomyces strains, but there are some examples in each subclass as listed above. For example, gentamicin is an aminoglycoside and fidaxomycin is a macrolide antibiotic. Antiprotozoal substances that are metronidazole derivatives have the stem nidazole. Metronidazole and tinidazole are indicated for bacterial and protozoal infections. Systemic antifungals that are miconazole derivatives have the stem conazole. Econazole, fluconazole, ketoconazole, miconazole, posaconazole, turconazole, and voriconazole are indicated for fungal infections. Don't confuse the stems nidazole and conazole. If we look at the indications for metronidazole and tinidazole, we see that most indications are for bacterial or protozoal infections, not fungal infections. Azole indicates the presence of an azole ring in the substance and is also present in the stems of piprazole and prazole. Antivirals have the base stem vir. Neuraminidase inhibitors have the stem amivir. Oseltamivir is used for the flu. Carbocyclic nucleosides have the stem cavir. Abacavir is used for HIV. Bicyclic heterocycle compounds have the stem cyclovir. Acyclovir, famciclovir, and valacyclovir are indicated for herpes. Valganciclovir is used for cytomegaloviral infections. HIV protease inhibitors have the stem navir. Indinavir and ritonavir are used for HIV. HIV integrase inhibitors have the stem tegravir. Dolutegravir and elvitegravir are used for HIV. Phosphonic acid derivatives have the stem fovir. Tenofovir is used for hepatitis B. Non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors have the stem virine. Doravirine and rilpivirine are used for HIV. Antivirals that are zidovudine derivatives have the stem vudine. Lamivudine and tabivudine are indicated for hepatitis type B. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and if you find this content helpful, please like and share the video. Also consider subscribing for similar content in the future.